TPP requires Vietnam's laws to be amended. Vietnam-US investment relation reviewed.
Hello and thank you for tuning in to another edition of BizLine brought to you by VTV International. You're with me, Lina Pham. And as usual, we'll start our show with several headlines in the economic and business scene for the past week. The National Financial Supervisory Commission has issued a report on the economic situation in the first 6 months of this year and made forecasts for the second half of the year. The trend of long-term growth in the economy is still positive. GDP in the first 6 months of 2016 followed the increased trend, but was lower than the same period in 2015 due to the decline in growth of the economic sector. The CPI, or Consumer Price Index, in the first 6 months of 2016 increased due to the rise in the price of medical and education services. It is forecast that the inflation rate in 2016 will be higher than in 2015, but will only be 4 to 4.5%. Liquidity in the whole banking system is abundant, actively supporting the demand for loans that will increase at the end of the year. Swiss financial institution Credit Suisse predicts Vietnam's GDP will rise to 6% this year, lower than the government's target of 6.7%. Credit Suisse previously warned that Vietnam and Singapore would be the most affected countries in Asia by potential UK exit from the European Union, as exports to the EU market account for 6 to 7% of total GDP. Another international organization, Business Monitor International, has also lowered its forecast for Vietnam's GDP growth in 2016 to 5.9%. Meanwhile, Business Wire Bloomberg suggested the country's agriculture sector was a barrier for Vietnam's GDP growth. The most severe drought during the past 3 decades has influenced production and exports of major products such as rice and coffee, lowering the GDP growth rate. Import taxes on 4,959 types of goods from the Eurasian Economic Union countries will be reduced to 0 immediately when the free trade agreement between Vietnam and the Union takes effect this year. The change is part of the agreement's tax reduction roadmap for 2016-2018. In 2018, 144 more tariff lines will be eliminated, increasing the number of zero tax lines to 5,103, or 54% of the total. The EU, which comprises Russia, Belarus, Kazakhstan, Armenia, and Kyrgyzstan, signed the deal with Vietnam in May 2015. This was the EU's first trade deal with an external partner. The deal is expected to increase trade revenue annually between Vietnam and the EU to $10 billion in 2020 from the current $4 billion. Vietnam needs to amend 34 laws and other legal documents, including 10 codes and laws, 22 decrees, due to its possible participation in the Trans-Pacific Partnership. The news was announced at a seminar jointly held by the National Assembly Committee for External Affairs and National Assembly Law Committee on Tuesday. At the event, the participants reviewed the TPP's content and analyzed Vietnam's commitments in the agreement on legal differences and legal adjustments that were required to be made in line with TPP's regulations. The seminar also discussed the role of the National Assembly in ratifying and supervising the implementation of the TPP and measures to compel institutions to undergo proper legal reform. Both domestic and global gold prices have increased partly due to the psychological impact of the British withdrawal from the EU, according to the State Bank of Vietnam. Another reason is the U.S. Federal Reserve's continued delay in raising interest rates, leading many investors to consider gold as a risk prevention measure. From July the 5th to the 6th, domestic gold prices have increased quickly and have now surpassed the global gold prices. Some people are not selling any gold at the moment, causing a temporary supply shortage. In the context of fluctuating gold prices, the State Bank will closely monitor gold market development and is ready to intervene when necessary. Experts suggest people be careful in making any buying or selling decisions because the current gold price trend will not last long and the market sentiment will gradually stabilize. It is estimated that about 263,000 people affected by the mass fish deaths in the central region are still in need of support in order to develop their livelihoods, according to the Ministry of Labor, Invalids and Social Affairs. Among them, 100,000 people are directly affected and 163,000 suffer indirect impacts. As assigned by the government, the Ministry of Labor, Invalids and Social Affairs will coordinate with the provinces of Quảng Bình, Hà Tĩnh, Thừa Thiên Huế, and Quảng Trị to create new jobs or make labor export plans. The Ministry of Agriculture and Rural Development is also working on plans to train and support fishermen to go fishing in areas far from shore. The majority of local residents still expect to maintain sea-related livelihoods. We have just reviewed some of the several business and economic highlights over the past week. Up next, let's learn more about the prospects of U.S. investment into Vietnam in our crosstalk. Relations between Vietnam and the United States are at a historic high following the establishment of the Vietnam-U.S. Comprehensive Partnership in 2013. President Obama's recent visit to Vietnam builds on this positive momentum and propels bilateral relationship to the next level. As the two countries are pushing for early ratification of the Trans-Pacific Partnership or the TPP agreement, Vietnam is forecasted to become an attractive investment destination to American businesses. This signifies a new wave of U.S. investment expected to pour into Vietnam in the coming years. In celebration of 21 years of normalization of diplomatic relations between Vietnam and the U.S. on July 11th, our BizLine edition this week takes a look at the trend and how to tap the true potential of U.S. investment into Vietnam with Deputy Regional Managing Director of U.S. ASEAN Business Council in Vietnam, Vũ Tú Thanh. But first, let's take a snapshot at the U.S. investment relations with Vietnam in the following clip.
The U.S.-Vietnam economic relations are based on two pillars, trade and investment. In fact, the relations have flourished as the U.S. being Vietnam's largest export market and ranked 7th out of the 101 countries and territories investing in Vietnam. The nation invested $11.73 billion in total direct investment to Vietnam as of April this year. Many major U.S. corporations such as Intel, General Electric, Microsoft, AIG, Coca-Cola, Chevron have successfully invested in Vietnam for many years. However, both nations have yet to tap its true potential.
Thank you very much for joining our BizLine program about Vietnam-U.S. investment relation.
My pleasure.
2016 marks the 15th year of the Vietnam-U.S. bilateral trade agreements. So how has the investment relation between Vietnam and U.S. transformed for the past decade?
The first wave of American investment in Vietnam came about the time when the two countries normalized relations in 1995. So, for example, Coca-Cola came here in 1994, I believe. So it's just 1 year before normalization. GE came here in 1993. So these first investors in Vietnam came to invest in mostly the manufacturing sector. And that was because of the advantages that Vietnam had at that time, which was cheap labor, which was, I think, huge incentives, like long and generous tax breaks, and I think land was also cheap at that time. Now, this second wave of investors no longer targeted cheap labor or cheap natural resources in Vietnam. What brought them here, I believe, is stability in the economy. Because of the bargaining power of the Vietnamese economy is comparatively lower than other economies in the region. Big multinational companies tend to have a higher level of attention from the central government and the provincial government where they are located than in other economies. But somehow investors do feel the great support from the central government. And I think that encourages other companies to join.
$11 billion is the amount of investment U.S. investors have invested in Vietnam so far. So what do you think about this number? And is it lower than expectation? And what can be done to raise this number?
It could still be higher. We have a number of companies who are considering either expanding their existing operation in Vietnam, or an entirely new investment in Vietnam. When we decided to invest in Vietnam from the beginning, we thought we would stay for a long time. And so expanding our operation in Vietnam is just part of the original strategy. The government should look at specific cases and decide which type of investment, which sector, and which individual investors they would like to encourage in the country, so they can give those incentives to get them to expand in Vietnam.
Similar to other provinces and cities across Vietnam, improving business environment to attract local and foreign investors remains the key task of Hanoi in the next 5 years. That's also the main theme of the Hanoi 2016 Cooperation, Investment and Development Conference, held in June. At the conference, the city leaders called for investment for 95 projects with a total value of $31.3 billion.
Sự hỗ trợ cũng như quá trình mà giải quyết các thủ tục đầu tư nó được thông thoáng, nhanh gọn là điều rất là quan trọng.
Many businesses expect new solutions to reduce administrative procedures and improve the business environment from the local authority.
Tạo mọi cái điều kiện cho các doanh nghiệp cũng như là các cái người dân tiếp cận với các cái thông số liên quan về đất đai, và thành phố Hà Nội sẽ là cái cầu nối để tạo cho các cái doanh nghiệp tiếp cận với cái nguồn vốn của ngân hàng.
Addressing the conference, Prime Minister Nguyễn Xuân Phúc requested the capital to create favorable conditions for newly established businesses.
Sẵn sàng đổi mới, sẵn sàng chấp nhận cái mới, có nhiều sáng kiến khuyến khích, hỗ trợ để những mô hình doanh nghiệp, khởi nghiệp, doanh nghiệp sáng tạo mới nhanh chóng phát triển ở Hà Nội, thay vì phải thành lập ở nước ngoài.
At the end of the conference, there were 70 investors registering to pour capital into 52 projects with a total investment capital of $13.4 billion.
When Prime Minister Nguyễn Xuân Phúc took office, he has implementing many business meetings and changes to improve the business conditions and environment. What do you think of these moves?
We, as the American business community in Vietnam, watched the change of government in Vietnam very closely because it affects business in serious ways. He organized the first major business meeting with the business community on April 29th in Ho Chi Minh City. He sends a very strong message. That is, every agency has to be judged by their economic performance, including judicial agencies like the Ministry of Public Security. I think it's getting in the right direction. It has energized agencies across the board.
What barriers are U.S. investors facing when investing in Vietnam?
Up until a few years ago, it was corruption. There are inconsistencies in the regulatory environment. According to the investment law, they would be entitled to certain, incentives, including tax break. The tax law, however, doesn't allow that kind of incentive. So there is an inconsistency between the investment law and the tax law.
What should the Vietnamese government do to eliminate these barriers?
The overall goal of attracting foreign investors is to help the local economy, to help local businesses. And in order to do that, the government has been trying a series of measures, right? They're reinvigorating the administrative procedures reform. And they are also applying technologies to governance, right? You're looking at e-government, e-customs, e-tax, that not only increases productivity, but it also separates the public service users and public officials, which helps eliminate the opportunities for corruption.
U.S. paint company Sherwin-Williams entered the Vietnamese market in February this year. They shared that the company did not face any difficulties in terms of administrative procedures while applying to enter the market. This indicates an improved investment climate for foreign investors seeking to expand their operation in Vietnam.
Cơ bản chúng tôi không gặp khó khăn gì liên quan đến thủ tục kinh doanh và hành chính. Đây là một điểm thuận lợi. Tôi đánh giá cao về những thay đổi trong môi trường kinh doanh của Việt Nam trong những năm gần đây. Điều này đã tạo thuận lợi cho chúng tôi nhiều trong việc kinh doanh. Tôi hy vọng môi trường kinh doanh sẽ tiếp tục được cải thiện.
Meanwhile, many U.S. companies wanting to invest abroad is now seeking new markets. And this has helped Vietnam become more attractive in the eyes of American investors.
I think you'll see the energy sector, the mining sector, the gaming and leisure sector as sectors where you'll see infusions of cash into your country.
To me, the top three are technology, electric utilities, and telecommunications, because all of the things that are going to be happening where huge investments, like in smart grid worldwide, they're going to be investing $1 trillion.
According to many investors, Vietnam holds great potential for consumption and business opportunities compared to other countries in the region. Therefore, foreign direct investment from the US into Vietnam is likely to surge rapidly in the coming period, boosting the US ranking in terms of Vietnam's top investors.
I'd like to see the United States become Vietnam's #1 investor. I think with TPP, that is a real possibility. There are also some other reforms that will help Vietnam attract more foreign direct investment from the United States.
U.S. ambassador to Vietnam, Ted Osius, has shared his expectation that the U.S. will become a top investor in Vietnam. Do you think this goal is realistic?
Well, yeah, there are different ways to become a top investor, right? If you count it in dollar terms, then it will take probably some years before the United States will become the biggest investor in Vietnam in terms of dollar size. But you can also define top investor in other ways, right? You know, if you look at the most innovative sectors, right, or the most sustainable investment, then I think the United States can now claim that position, right? If you look at sustainable investments, what do they invest in? Healthcare, manufacturing for export, you know, the likes of Nike and Levi's. Electronics, you know, the likes of Intel, high-tech agriculture, biotechnology, financial services. All those are very innovative and technology-based industries. Not real estate, you know, not natural resource intensive industries. So I think U.S. is number one investor in those areas.
In recent years, the Vietnamese government has shown their determination in improving investment conditions for foreign investors. For example, fighting against corruption or improving the business conditions. So do you think this can help improve the investment between Vietnam and U.S.?
I think Vietnam is, especially with the new government, it is moving in the right direction. Identifying the top priority as helping the domestic businesses as the first priority. I think it's a good move. When you improve the business environment for your domestic businesses, everyone else will benefit. Lots of challenges ahead, though, but you know, it's encouraging to see they're taking these steps.
US President Barack Obama was in Vietnam from May the 23rd to the 25th for an official visit. These are the images of the president leaving for Vietnam. Images like these were widely circulated by US media, and the exposure has helped clear US investors' doubt about investing in the Asian market.
That's going to tell Americans, those American businesses that are not in Vietnam yet, that may not know much about Vietnam, it tells them that the relationship's on the right track, that stability that Vietnam is always talking about is there.
There is a renewed excitement about Vietnam because of Vietnam's participation in TPP. I think there will be a lot of discussion of how the U.S. can work together with Vietnam.
During his visit, President Obama expressed his determination to facilitate the ratification of the TPP in 2016.
Vietnam and the U.S. are pushing for early ratification of the TPP. So how do you think it will impact the investment relation between Vietnam and the U.S.?
Even now, before the TPP is ratified by both, by the legislature of the 12 TPP countries, Vietnam is already seeing the positive impact of the pending TPP. And that is increased investments in a number of sectors that would produce exports, right? I believe the garment and textile industry has seen vast investments in the last couple of years. The numbers are in the billions. We've seen a surge in inquiries from companies who have not had an operation in Vietnam, but who are interested in opportunities that the TPP will bring. A member company is looking at investing in fiber production in Vietnam to take advantage of the yarn forward rule in TPP for the textile industry.
21 years since the normalization of diplomatic relations between Vietnam and the U.S., U.S. direct investment in Vietnam witnessed a boom in 2007-2010, amounted to $9.6 billion. However, the figures have declined since 2011 to date, as the two nations are pushing for early ratification of the PPP. Vietnam is forecasted to become a more attractive investment destination for American businesses. This indicates a possibility of a new wave of U.S. investment into Vietnam after the 2007-2010 boom.
Investment from the United States to Vietnam has entered a new phase. What's your prediction of the investment from the U.S. to Vietnam in the coming time?
In a longer term, I believe when TPP is ratified and takes effect, I think we will see a new wave of investment in Vietnam across the board, not just in the traditional sector such as manufacturing, but also in the high-tech sector, and especially from the U.S. small and medium-sized companies. So far, almost all U.S. investment in Vietnam has come from only big global American companies. U.S. small companies do not have the resources that bigger companies have in terms of exploring and developing markets in frontier economies like Vietnam. Right. So when that has been done, the regulatory framework has been laid out, which is appropriate for doing business, then you will see U.S. small companies come to Vietnam. And that, I think, will be a game changer, because so far it's very difficult for Vietnamese companies, most of whom are small companies, to connect with U.S. investors in Vietnam, which are global companies. There is a mismatch, a disconnect between the local business community and the U.S. foreign companies here because of the difference in size and corporate culture and everything else. So with U.S. small businesses come in, right, they are in a better position to match with the Vietnamese business community, and together these small companies, both Vietnamese and U.S. companies, can join the global supply chain of the big American companies or multinational companies. And with that, I believe investment will increase in Vietnam.
Thank you for joining us.
My pleasure.
The U.S. is seen as the world's biggest direct investor abroad, with total foreign investment stood at $4.8 trillion, of which the Asia-Pacific region accounts for about 21 to 24% of total investment capital. Based on these figures and Vietnam's recent efforts in improving its investment environment for foreign firms, increased U.S. investment into Vietnam is within reach. However, more needs to be done in terms of increasing transparency, improving intellectual property rights, and administrative procedure reform. We hope that our program has provided you with a comprehensive review of the Vietnam-U.S. investment relations. And these also wrap up our episode of BizLine this week. Thank you very much for being with us. You can always rewatch our show at vtv4.vn or youtube.com/vtv4go. From our team here in Hanoi, until next time.